Good evening, everyone. I'm Helona Norton Westbrook. I am the director of the Honolulu Museum of Art, and we are just so incredibly pleased to have you here this evening. So the occasion that brings us all together this evening is, of course, this amazing exhibition that we have just opened, Perspective Should Be Reversed, from the collection of Jordan Schnitzer and his Family Foundation, and we are just absolutely delighted to be able to share this with you. It has been about 3 years in the making that we've been working on this extraordinary exhibition. I hope that you've had a chance to see it already, and if not, this will be a great beginning introduction to this incredible artist and his work. So we're very lucky this evening to have 3 panelists with us. Of course, Jordan Schnitzer and his incredible collection that he brings and has shared all over the country with museums like ours. He has been collecting since 1988, I believe. Is that right, Jordan? Yes. But his first love of collecting came from his mother, who ran a contemporary art gallery in Portland, Oregon. And it was there that he really began to identify as a collector and got the collecting bug. And his collection is absolutely incredible. It contains some of the best contemporary artists of our time. It is now over 22,000 works. It has traveled to many, many museums. I believe over 160 museum exhibitions have been made from Jordan's collection, and he is incredibly generous with his philanthropy, with his collection, and with his generosity and his love of art. So I'm so pleased to have Jordan here tonight to talk with us about his collecting. Also with us this evening is Kimberly Davis. So Kimberly Davis was born in Los Angeles. She graduated from Pratt Institute and Hunter College in New York and has worked in New York at the Guggenheim and at PS1. And then later she went to Los Angeles and has been the director of the LA Louver Gallery since 1985. The LA Louver Gallery was founded in 1975. It is a contemporary art gallery representing internationally acclaimed artists such as David Hockney and Deborah Butterfield, Alison Sarr, and Matt Wadle. And LA Louver has presented 24 solo exhibitions of David Hockney over the decade, so that's pretty incredible. And from 1978, that was when the first one happened up until the present. And there's been over 30 museum exhibitions that they've assisted with worldwide of David Hockney's work. Also joining us, we're incredibly delighted, is Doug Roberts, who's a private art dealer based in Los Angeles and a longtime personal friend of David Hockney. Doug was always good at art growing up. As a child, he studied drawing, painting, printmaking, and art history at UCLA and graduated with a major in art. His savvy understanding of the way in which artists imagined and made their work led to his work as an art dealer, gallery owner, and director of a fine art printmaking workshop. Over the years, he forged many personal relationships with artists, including David Hockney. What started as a young art major fresh out of college, listening to Mr. Hockney extol the wonders of Picasso while sitting on his kitchen floor, blossomed into a great friendship that has persisted over 4 decades. So I'm so excited tonight to welcome Jordan, Kimberly, and Doug to the stage. Everybody has their microphone. So you've all had a unique relationship with David Hockney and his work, and I would just love to hear from each of you in your own words a little bit about your relationship with him and what it has meant to you. Jordan.
I don't remember exactly when I first saw his work. I think it was when I was in high school or college or law school. But probably the most memorable moment was at LACMA. They have a giant painting called Mulholland Drive, and that's one of my favorite paintings in the world. And when I started buying prints in multiples in 87, 88, I'd gone down to a gallery in Portland, the Ogden Gallery, to maybe veer away a little bit from only buying art of the Pacific Northwest, which we still buy, and I always talk about the importance of supporting local artists in this community and all across the country, even though this collection I have has some of the best artists of our time. And of the 3 prints I bought that first day, one was a work by Frank Stella, a small triangular piece. Another was a work by Jim Dine, a heart, skull, and cross called Garrity Necklace, and a Hockney from the Blue Guitar series, a little Picasso-like head. So when I started buying prints, he was right there, one of the first 3, and the purchasing hasn't stopped yet, including Tuesday morning at 4 in the morning, I got a call from London because there was a sale of Hockney prints, and we bought 27 more. So it's been a joy to grow with him and have his work in our collection.
Great.
I was lucky enough growing up as a child to have a David Hockney poster in my home from the Grimm's fairy tales. I never actually saw it as an etching until many years later. But when I moved to California from New York in 1979, David was one of the first artists that I met. I was working with another art dealer, Bernie Jacobson, and I had a small print gallery across the street from Gemini on Melrose, in the parking lot of a very famous restaurant at that time, Ma Maison. Had a young chef, Wolfgang Puck, who used to make our lunches for us. And David was a frequent visitor there, often there with Vincent Price or others. It was always fun. So he was a regular visitor to the gallery from early days on.
I first met David by chance. A young friend of mine, Ian Falconer, we had just graduated art school, and Ian was also an art major and was friendly with David. And David had come into the gallery once or twice while I was working at my first job out of college, straight into a gallery. And David had come in to acquire a sculpture of an English artist friend of his. He wanted to buy one of his pieces for the house. And so I'd met him, but it was brief. But it wasn't until a little later that Ian actually took me to the house, and we walked in the door, and David was on the kitchen floor sorting Polaroid pictures on the floor, making Polaroid collages of I think it was Gary and his boyfriend at the time, taking pictures of the two of them and laying it out. And then proceeded to give me a 2-hour lecture on Picasso. And I suspect I was attentive, asked all the right questions. I was a painting student. We talked about line and everything, all of the things that artists talk about. And we've been friends for 40 years.
So do you each have a favorite Hockney memory that you would like to share? Jordan?
Well, I've had 160 or almost 180 exhibitions all over the country and a few internationally. We also support lots of museums, and the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, even though they have a $9 billion endowment, started reaching out to raise some additional funds, and they started a thing called the Getty Medals about maybe 10 years ago, and since I had published the catalog raisonné for Ellsworth Kelly, I've done 14 books on artists. They asked if I would be willing to help sponsor the dinner that he was given an award. And that started the relationship with the Getty Museum that has blossomed, and we now sponsor an event almost every year. And so when they called up and said, well, this year, how about sponsoring David Hockney's 80th birthday? I said, you bet. So I came down. My late mother, who passed away 4 years ago, was with me, and my daughter, who's coming in tomorrow. And so I met him that night at the big opening, and then the next day we went and spent most of the day in his studio, and had dinner in Jim Kuno, the director then of the Getty, in his office with David again. So those 3 days were the only times I've spent with him, and it was pretty special. I think some of the images may be on the screen at some point, being in his studio where Doug has been so often, and he's showing us the iPad and talking again, not lecturing in a condescending way, but like a professorial way about, they brought books out about perspective and showing the iPad that he works on and what he does and how he does it and whatever, and it was just enchanting. And what was in the studio then were like the 90 portraits of people, including Doug, all around the room. And then I did sneak off while he was talking and went and looked at his deck and his pool that was all colored the famous pool, one of the famous pools with all the blue colors on it, and his decks and colors, amazing. And even his house, even the soaps in his bathroom were colored soaps. I don't think he knew about that, but it was a wonderful, wonderful moment, and very down to earth. He did have a cigarette flop in his mouth, and the ashes would just fall on the floor, and there was a burnt hole in the blue sweater that's in some of the images in the show here, but it was a very, very special time, and especially with my mother, who helped me get into art, and my daughter, who's as passionate about art as I am.
That's great. Kimberly?
Well, I've had the pleasure of many special times, and David has been living abroad actually since before the pandemic started, 2018, end of 2018, 2019. Bought a house in Normandy, but I would be a regular visitor to the studio once a month, once every 6 weeks to see what was going on. And one of the most extraordinary things was that he was an extraordinary reader, and whatever he was reading, he would tell you all about that and how it would then relate to whatever he was working on. And we would sit in the studio and, kind of hang out for an hour or two. People would come and go. And I very much miss having him in Los Angeles now, just because it was such a pleasure. It felt like a pleasure and a privilege to be able to just be there with him. But a story that really goes back and connects here is that in 1990, when the Contemporary Museum opened, I traveled with him for the opening of that museum, the extraordinary installation of Ravel's Garden in the little pavilion, and I will never forget dancing on top of the pool at the Twig Smith's home on Diamond Head, and the exhibitions throughout that very beautiful building. And it was a very, very special occasion. I had just had a child 5 months before, and it was the first time I left, so it was very emotional as well. But we had so much fun, and whenever we traveled anywhere together, and I've gone a number of times to different exhibitions we've been involved with, we always have fun.
I was listening to you and I've lost my train of thought. Both Kim and Jordan have described David in a couple of ways that I just wanted to echo. One is that he reads incessantly, easily a book a week, probably. And that fuels the work that he paints and the way he sees the world, and the fact that he just sits and focuses on the simplest things and draws them well. It's all very, very true. And I'm talking about
You're talking
my
about a
fondest
favorite memory. Just one.
Right,
I mean, there's
exactly.
many.
Pick one. I'll tell the most recent that I can think of. When David just out of the blue phoned me up, it was a summer of painting in his studio, and I had sat for a crandache and charcoal portrait, which I think is on the slideshow. And he had also drawn Tom Daly without his clothes on. So the first young man that he had drawn without his clothes on since the 60s, really. I mean, it had been a long time. And we teased him about that, you haven't painted a naked boy in 30 years, what's wrong with you, And he's like, well, it's never, introduce me to someone. So you bring him an Olympic gold medalist who essentially wears a Speedo all day anyway, and so it wasn't much of a stretch for Tom to sit for David. And they had a great, they had met a couple of times prior to that, so it was the following summer when he actually did come up and sit. But they'd had a great rapport, and David ended up drawing him twice, 2 different poses on 2 different days. So I think he enjoyed it quite a bit, just for the pure fun of doing it. And he's built like a diver, let's face it. So that, and then he also painted Ed Sheeran, the singer, that summer, and seems to me he painted a Hawaiian the singer who Bruno Mars. He painted Bruno Mars sitting next to the card table in the studio. So he calls me up one Friday afternoon and says, "Hey, do you want to go with me to see Ed Sheeran at the Rose Bowl tomorrow night?" And I was like, "Sure." Well, come to the house at 4:30. We're going to see Ed. We're sitting in the box with his parents, so put on nice clothes. And we'll probably go backstage so we can meet the others, which is all basically what happened. So that was a lot of fun. So yeah, doing stuff with David is always a great time. And Kim had mentioned how it's a joy to have him in Los Angeles, and he's a super smart, intellectual man with a lot to say, and really loves life and loves to draw and paint. And not having that voice in our town for the last few years while he's been in Europe has been tough. So I did speak to David on the phone this morning on FaceTime, and he was very excited about the show this evening. And he was very excited to hear about the piece that the museum has had on display here at the Rijksgarden. And he asked me to take a video of the show and send it to him on text, so sorry.
So he's here with us in spirit this evening.
So, I mean, Doug is being humble here. When we've been together a lot, he talks to David Hockney once, twice a week. Suddenly he'll say, "Look, my iPhone," David was in bed and just did a little pad drawing, send it to him, which he destroys. I mean, he doesn't, they frequent all the time. This is so much fun for me with both of them. They've had so much contact with them. It's great. I feel like I'm in the audience with all of you. But that's what he called this morning, so I asked to tell him about the show. And I sent the videos I took. Did you send those to him?
I'll send them to him.
Yeah, he'll see them all.
He'll see them all. One of the things that David has done for many years when he started getting involved with things that were more technological, and that comes out of his father, who was an inventor and a wonderful photographer as well, instilled in him the idea of photography. From all of that, he started early with color Xeroxes, which are included in the show, and faxes. There was a beautiful exhibition that went to the São Paulo Biennale that was just, he said, "I don't have to go there, I'll just send it by fax." And a whole exhibition was just sent and pinned up to the wall. So he did make a catalog, and which was also just black and white as well at that point. But now he's still, the idea that he sends out all these images to a group of friends who keep them. Now they are accompanied by a statement at the bottom. You can't share them with anyone. You can't print them. Look at them and destroy them. Or your life is in danger. It was.
So I, just wanted to add that I was lucky enough to be there at that 80th birthday celebration that Jordan so generously made sure happened at the Getty Museum. And I had a chance to go to David's studio that same week and meet him. And a colleague and I brought him a catalog of the museum where I was working then. And it was the most extraordinary thing because there was probably 20 people in the studio, being very social, engaged, and all of a sudden, David was just absorbed in this catalog for about an hour, studying it intently, because that is part of his practice and part of the amazingness of his mind. So it was very special to see that. And there's very few times in life, I feel, where you meet somebody famous and they exceed your expectation. And I feel with David, he was just so clearly such a kind and humble and incredibly talented human, and it just felt glorious to be able to be in his presence for a couple hours. So that's my memory of him.
We all just have to travel a little more, I guess, to see him. It's not so bad either.
Why don't you describe when he left Los Angeles? Why don't you tell everybody where he went and what he's done and where he's living and what's going on with him? Because you've been over there a bunch of times.
David left LA to help organize an exhibition in Europe. And I think it was the show at There was a show at the Van Gogh Museum, exactly. It was the Van Gogh Museum, but it seems there was another show also in London at the same time, but I can't remember. But there was a Van Gogh Museum show. And he'd gone over to prepare for that a couple of months early. And then one person said to one person, another person said to another person, and pretty soon he's looking for property in Normandy.
He went to Normandy to look at the Bayeux tapestries.
Right, went to Normandy to look at the Bayeux tapestries. And then the property in Normandy was located, and he bought it. And
It was the first piece of property he saw.
that's true, but it was a really good price, and it was and it was in complete disrepair. I mean, this building, which is depicted in the show, is 1680. Okay, it probably had a thatch roof. I mean, it was mud walls and timbers. You know, it's incredibly charming. It's a hobbled together cottage that's been there forever. It has actually I would call it a custom country kitchen with a proper 20th century sink and whatever. I mean, it has things that make it real and 20th century, but it is a cavern of a place that's kind of beautiful and super charming. And I like to say, from the back door to the creek at the bottom, it's a 3-par. It's a chip shot to the green and a putt in.
But there was also a very beautiful cider mill that was transformed magically into a beautiful studio.
In 3 months.
I'm sure at great cost, but it was absolutely stunning. The proportions were almost identical to the studio that he had in Los Angeles, so he's immediately comfortable just in the space. There's another barn on the property that they haven't done anything with, but
It's where he stores the tractor and the garden equipment. And honestly, he's got a little vegetable garden out there now. He grows his own food. And so all of that stuff is there, and it's comfortable inside that falling apart barn from 300 years ago. It's fine.
I was wondering if each of you could sort of speak to either a particular work of Hockney's that you love, or what it is about his work that you find most resonates with you.
Can I go first?
Sure.
So it's interesting you brought that up, because I was just staring at the most recent pieces in the exhibition are those 2 pond pictures from the Normandy property. And the way he depicts water, the way he depicts rain falling on water, and the sort of mechanic of the way he draws a ring and a drop. And for him, it's become automatic for 40 years, in a way. And it reminds me of a painting that was in the retrospective. It's called Japanese Rain on Canvas, from about 64-ish, 68-ish. And it is raw canvas, stained with pigment of those rings and of raindrops dropping in. And because it's raw canvas, it's like the watercolor, it's like water staining the canvas, representing water falling and plodding onto a pond, if that makes sense, in a kind of abstract way. And it's a really beautiful painting, incredibly beautiful. I think it's just rain on pond or something. So you afford 40 years later to these pieces where that rain is now depicted in the same way with an iPad, a stylus on a piece of glass. And he still has that same, there's the same character in that line. And it's just beautiful. So that was the tie.
So first, what's wonderful about these exhibitions for me is you may sit there and think, gosh, he owns all this stuff. Well, first of all, that's wrong. I guess there is a title to it, but I have no sense of ownership, none. A great sense of stewardship, and love being the facilitator. For me, these exhibitions are all about the art and the audience. Now, in terms of the work, usually I buy all this stuff. We buy about 1,000 things a year, and I buy them from the auction catalogs, from little images, and they get sent to the warehouse. I have a 56,000 warehouse in Portland. It does have a 4,000 of it, what now is an exhibition area in front, where we actually hired someone and are doing shows there all the time. But for me, what's wonderful about the exhibitions, we have 8 or 9 of them traveling right now, is I actually get to see the work, just like all of you. Okay? Now, in this exhibition, there are 4 works that actually I lived with. And the first one is there's a little Xerox print about this big of a flower. And I had that in the house with my late ex-wife and daughters for years. And I also had image of Gregory in that house. Love those pieces. Then I moved to a different house, and those went in the warehouse. And we put up in the latest house Hotel Acalan 2 weeks later, and also that yellow flower piece. And in the previous house, beyond, we had image of Gregory up. We had the Celia up, image of Celia. So when I see these works in the exhibition, first, like any of you that maybe have some art and then you maybe stored it and you see it again, it sort of brings back memories of another time and place. So I love those. I think of the older work, the image of Celia, I lusted for that. I tried to buy it over years. Why didn't I buy it? Well, because maybe it was a little more money at the time, or I didn't, I think it's wonderful when you can't have everything you want. It's wonderful in the world I'm in with this art of there are things I'll look at over 10 years and want to buy. And then I'll be annoyed that, God, I missed it at X dollars and now it's 3 times as much, but whatever. But that image of Celia, I just look at it again and it is just breathtaking. Now the latest work, which I saw, and we should talk about how this works, but in terms of David Hockney's new work, Kimberly represents him in the gallery, and she'll call up, and in the case of all that new giant work, she held a set of all of it for me and told me to get myself down to LA, and we went to their warehouse, not the gallery, and it was on the floor, and it was all over, and looked at it, and it just, and so we got it all, even though that was a stretch for me, but I knew from a legacy standpoint, it was the right thing to do for the artist, for our collection, and for you. So this is the first time I've seen all that work up. There were a few pieces in the warehouse, on the floor and whatever, and I have to tell you, just like Doug was saying, these latest works are, it's like I'm catatonic looking at them. I'm speechless. How does he, even with his artistic genius, how does he take that iPad and in terms of those flower images with the vases, the way he distorts, the pattern of the doily underneath it and the flowers and the raindrops. I think there's some of the most exquisite work, this latest work, that he's ever done. He's just getting better and better and better, and we're the beneficiary of all that. So in terms of favorite works in the show, I love that image of Gregory. The image of Celia just, I think, is one of the best of everything. But this latest work, I'm still processing how deliciously beautiful the work is. And I'm so glad that it's here for all of you and for me to see. It's just that good. How does someone just create such amazing things of beauty? And I guess what I love about art and about this show is this, the only thing that competes with art like this is Mother Nature, right? The greatest abstract artist ever, okay? But just think about the human genius, that creativity that is in each of us in different levels that is able to create this work, and how lucky we are.
Actually, Jordan, thanks, a big shout out, as they say now, for, having the passion to collect the work in order to have it exhibited. And really also to Honolulu. The Art Museum here has done 2 years worth of preparation to pull this together. It's a lot of work. And you should
thanks to Catherine Whitney and
really
Catherine Love.
proud of this show. This is it's really it's well written. It's well written. The wall cards are fantastic. It's very instructional. You learn about an 84-year-old man that you may not have ever known, but you get to watch him decade by decade by decade see the world. It's a very informative exhibition. You may like him at the end. You may not like him at the end. Hopefully the work is easily grasped, by the 4-year-old in the audience and the 90-year-old in the audience. So, oops. So anyway, thanks to the museum for pulling this off. All of you are lucky, and bring your families.
Well, one of the great pleasures that I've had is having been a part of so many exhibitions. It's very hard to say, oh, this one is the best. And the newest is always, in a certain way, the best because it has to exceed something that has come before it. But everyone has their favorites, and the Mother Nature part of things, included in this exhibition is a whole series of works from the arrival of spring. And it was a series that began in East Bridlington and David's, in an area where he grew up, and over a period of 6 months, 6 months plus, he made 51 images, or 53 images. There were two that were separate to the 49 images that comprise the arrival of spring from January 1st to June 2nd. And you can see a range of those things as the nature is turning, and it's a very beautiful series. When it was first shown, not only in the gallery situation, you couldn't actually show all 49 at once because it was too overwhelming for people to have to choose to buy. So we made 3 exhibitions. The practicalities of it. 3 exhibitions of 16 so that people could really look at those works. And at the end of 2.5 years, the whole presentation was made, and in a number of museums, but in particular, the Ludwig Museum in Cologne had a magnificent room where the whole series was double hung on 3 walls on a 3-story room, and you walked down a set of stairs to get into this room, and the experience was just magnificent. You felt as if not only you could see the seasons changing, you could see how he was looking at literally the same roads, the same gates over different periods of time as spring and summer came into bloom. But you were right there with him. It was a wonderful, wonderful series of works.
David is very good about taking you on a journey. And he being hard of hearing, nearly deaf, he's a visually oriented man. So he sees the world in a visual way with an acuity that may pass us. He often talks about sitting on a park bench smoking a cigarette and noticing the squirrel and the jogger running past, and as she passes, does this with her hand because the cigarette's bothering her, and she's missing the squirrel and the changing leaf and the park, the beauty around her because she's fussing over his cigarette. Well, he likes to smoke, so of course he fusses over cigarettes and people who wrinkle their nose at him.
Do you feel that there's a particular era of David's work that really resonates with
I've
you?
always been a fan of his very early work. He wasn't a rich kid from Bradford, earned his way into Bradford School of Art, and then applied to the Royal College in London, and was accepted with the young upstarts of 1959. I think his class was rather rambunctious for this very traditional University of Art in the middle of London. So he was a bit of a troublemaker from the beginning, but he also was given sort of a scholarship and a stipend so he could buy some paints and he could buy some canvas and stretch bars. He could build stretcher bars and he could begin his work. But simultaneously, he realized that was going to go very quickly and he wasn't going to be able to make very many canvases. But if you went up on the second floor, there was free paper, there was inks, there was a press, and plates on which to draw, and 2 assistants to help you. And it was free. So he immediately began making prints from the very beginning in college. And some of those, there's a couple of very early prints in the exhibition among the first 5 that he made in college. And Jordan, I know, has recently acquired a few more from that period in school. And he must have made a dozen pieces at least while those 3 years at the Royal College. So I've always been a real fan of that early work because it describes the mind going that is going to eventually become David Hockney. And it's personal. It talks about his quirks in the world. It shows who he was looking at. He was looking at Francis Bacon, the English portrait painter, and he was looking at Dubuffet, the French abstract. And there's a lot of Dubuffet in the early work, these kind of blobs representing people. And you see this in David's early etchings. And it wasn't until 5-ish years later that he began to really focus on academic drawing, making that little stick figure of himself more academically drawn. And so in the mid-60s, he began to be more academic with his approach to drawing. And in the 70s, very academic paintings, double portraits of friends of his, done lavishly in oil paint, taking 6 months to do, that literally put David Hockney on the map of the world. So that early decade for me in his development as David Hockney and really looking at the world is my favorite. Although what he painted yesterday is also my favorite.
There's also a time when coming into all those drawing skills, which he innately have, even when you look at works that he made in the 50s, you could see that he really knew how to draw. He really had the ability to build up an image very beautifully. But in the early part of the 70s, there are a very romantic group of pictures of his friends, of Celia, any of the people that were surrounding him at that time. Very naturalistic, very, very traditional in a certain way. And by the end of the 70s, when he got deeply involved with the work of Picasso from the Blue Guitar series, he started taking all of that apart, and he put into his work a sense of time. And when you look at things over a period of time, you can see how he used time as an element in what you were looking at as well. And that is a really important part of his work. As you look at the abstractions, of which there are a few, but they are really all based on something or a sense of space. When he was doing the theater work in the 70s and 80s, while he was still, deeply involved with the music world, with all of those things, that sense of deep space could be portrayed in different ways. And I think all that theater experience really helped him too.
That was Jordan's favorite piece from this period, where the portrait of Celia is done in the mid '80s, when Picasso was clearly evident in the fragmented figure on the work.
What do you think, Jordan?
And I will say, Jordan, the photographs directly across from your favorite piece are photographs where David says drawing with the camera, and he would draw up your leg and up your sleeve and your head, and then he would put the photographs together in like a little collage, and it was a way of seeing the way your eye sees, not just a single snapshot, but the whole room at once, from the elbow of the sitter at the Scrabble table to the elbow and the teacup of this sitter. So your eye sees that way, and he was trying to depict it this way. So out of those photographs from '82, and talking about Picasso, the Picasso lecture I got when I was first there was during this period of time. And directly out of that, he began to paint and draw that way. And the way he painted Celia was this sort of almost fragmented photograph being put together. And so that one activity leads to the activity of another. And the drawings and the painting, and then he was actually separating the canvases. He would draw the head up here, and he would draw the shirt sleeve here and on another canvas, and then he would hang 6 canvases together that represented a figure. So they really became, the photographs, gave reference to the paintings that came after, which then continued to progress. So he was always entertaining, always different, always fun.
And even when he was working in multiple panels in the landscape outside, when he was literally painting on 8 different canvases at once. There was a practical aspect that you could fit a 3x4, a 3x4 foot canvas could be stacked in like a pie rack in the back of a van. So you could travel with them very easily. And so,
Well, it made perfect sense to be able to make these very large canvases in small sections and piece them together that way.
Jordan, I'm going to turn it over to questions, but first I want to hear from you.
So what are my thoughts? Two points here. One, I love everything he does. Okay? I don't think about it, I feel it. And that's true with all the art I buy. What I feel fortunate about is I love buying the early work, because not having art history degrees like my 3 seatmates up here, I love retrospective shows because I think it's the easiest for many of us to get into the mind and heart and hear the voice of an artist when you see early work. So I'm fortunate to work. Doug's helped me a lot, others. You know, that work from 1954, he was 17 years old. And that work he gave to his mother. His mother gave
He made a mess on the living room floor.
Yeah. And he gave it to his mother. His mother gave it to her other son, John, and then he put it for sale and we bought it. So I think the beneficiary is all of us that get to see those early things.
That's a very rare print. There's only 6.
Yeah. Now, do those
And 4
works...
of them are in museums, and the other one's in his collection.
Yeah. So those early works, which we have probably 75 or 100, well, we have 378 works of his, of which they picked 148. Do those early works, do they turn me on as much as some of the latter work? No. But I find them intellectually fascinating. Whereas the other work, just I feel it. So in the collection we have with all the major artists, we try to get lots of early work of lots of them. Now, the second thing of what I was thinking was this. Our collection is sort of like a dumbbell. And yes, I've thought maybe that reflects the acquirer, but that's left to be seen. The first part of it is the big post-war II artists. So Lichtenstein, Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, Ellsworth Kelly, Frank Stella, Dorothea Rockburn, I mean, another, a couple dozen of others too. Robert Ryman, on. And I love all that work. We have 1,400 Warhols. We've got about 1,200 Jim Dines. Virtually all of Frank Stella I did his catalog raisonné. Lichtenstein, we've got about 275. I love everything Lichtenstein does. Oh, every single thing. Jasper Johns, oh my gosh. One thing about all that, I remember Rick Axon, who I did the Ellsworth Kelly catalog raisonné with, and then I did a book on Warhol, and I did a book on Terry Winter. It's about to be published, but I remember saying to him at the Warhol exhibition that was at the Portland Art Museum, we were there the day before it opened, and I said to him, gee, when I have the Lichtenstein exhibition, I end up saying to everybody, my gosh, the most important artist, the last half of the 20th century, his work dealing with consumerism and materialism, oh my God, he's fabulous. I said, when I have Jasper John's show, I say the same thing. I said, and here's Warhol, I say the same thing. And he said to me about those 5 or 6 artists, you can't really say one is better than the other. Of them all, I think Warhol will be the most, in the end, the one that's looked at as probably the most important artist of the last half of the 20th century, with Picasso being the most important in the first half, because Warhol is so accessible and his themes are so relevant to all of us. Okay, that's those folks. Now we have David Hockney. And what do I think about him? When I think about Lichtenstein, I don't think of him as a painter. I think of him as a brilliant artist. When I think about David Hockney, for me, he is a painter's painter. He is a brilliant painter. And I guess in my own mind, I differentiate. I don't mean to say that Jeff Koons and lots of the other artists and Hank Willis Thomas, I have enormous amounts of his work, fabulous, Alison Sarr, Kara Walker, whatever. Do I think of them as painters? No, I think of them as artists, who can paint, whereas David Hockney is from that tradition of painters that just is phenomenal. So that's how I react to his work. It's just in his own class. I'm not saying that we're all Liechtenstein comparing him to whatever. All I'm saying is he stands out uniquely in my mind because of the way he uses that craft of painting in the work that he does. What do you think about that?
I think he is an extraordinary artist, and I always think of him having the ability to paint with such ease and such confidence, and that I think he's a fabulous painter. But I think his drawing ability, which translates into the prints, which translates into all the work he's been doing, is at the heart of what he does. It is for him, in my mind, the eye, the hand, and the heart. Everything is mixed together, that how he's feeling things and seeing things.
I want to open it up to questions. Is that all right? Do we have some questions? Yes, Flora.
I'm interested in why I feel when I look at the work that Hockney does, there's a kind of a joy and exuberance that is very appealing. When I look at other painters, it could be Philip Still or any of the other ones, there's a kind of negativity that comes across much more strongly. Why does Hockney have this brightness and beauty? What do you think? You know him well. Why is that?
Okay. Well, the answer is a resounding yes. I mean, when I spoke to him on the phone this morning, he has a lapel pin on that says "Love Life." You know, it's sort of his moniker. You know, I'll tell you a little story. We were together in London. We were at the Rauschenberg exhibition. There was a large at the Tate in the big warehouse one across the river. It, I think, was maybe 2 floors. It occupied maybe the whole third. It was a very large exhibition that started the decade of the 50s, and the next room is the decade of the 60s and the 70s, and we're walking through the exhibition, and honestly, David and I were moving pretty slowly for the first couple of decades because Rauschenberg was filled with information from the 60s, from the 50s and 60s, and the way he made his work by rubbing newspaper, collaging, messages together that were really quite beautiful. And the gallery was relatively crowded, and people leave David alone, and he wears his hat, and he's got a long jacket on, and he's got a cane, and he's sort of, and he's deaf, so he doesn't really hear well, although he's got hearing aids on, he probably turns them down in a big room like that so he doesn't echo. And he's minding his own business, looking at the work, and we're making comments to one another. And this elderly couple sort of brushed past him. I kind of noticed them, but didn't really notice them. And they went around the corner into the next room. And David looked down and reached, and out of his pocket pulled this little note. And the note said, "Thank you for bringing so much joy to the world." And I mean, he started to break down a little bit. It was really a really thoughtful thing for someone to do. I mean, David's 80 years old at this point. So he was back in Los Angeles subsequent to that trip. So this would have been 4 or 5 years ago. And I walked into the studio, and on the wall is that little note framed at the studio door. So he's semi-conscious of the fact that he is against negativity in the world. He just doesn't even want to, life doesn't have to involve negativity. Yeah, there's problems and you got to fix the flat and whatever happens, but David generally surrounds himself with a more positive attitude for always. And not necessarily just because of his success, but because he practices it every day, because he doesn't stop drawing. He's drawing and painting every day. And in fact, this morning he shared a half-done picture that was on JP's phone of the current painting that he's working on, of JP sitting in the chair holding the little dachshund, the brand new little dachshund in his lap. And it was very hard to get a 6-year-old or 6-month-old, six-month-old dachshund to sit still long enough that he could draw. So it's rather good. So to answer your question, David just sees rainbows.
Kimberly, did you want to answer? And Jordan?
Well, I think that, it is just that he does love life. I mean, he does get up every day and is able to work, and that makes him happy, and that he can share that with everyone and all of us makes him happy too.
So the work that I buy falls into two categories. It's either work that is just luscious and pretty, or work that really grabs you. And we need both. So if we look at Kara Walker's work, my gosh, that show that's traveling and forces us to deal with those issues. Hank Willis Thomas, Allison Sarr, a number of these artists. I'm so proud of that work. We've had more exhibitions of women, of artists of color, Asians, Hispanics. We have all those shows traveling right now, Native Americans. Those are important shows for us to have, especially of those groups that for so many decades weren't really allowed and favored in museums like this or others across the country. We loaned about a third of the stuff to Judy Chicago's new big exhibition at the New Museum in New York, and we're the second biggest sponsor, and we have lots of her stuff, sculptures, but paintings, all this stuff. And I mean, when you talk to her, the way she was really blackballed for decades, and the show is amazing if you get to see it. And with David Hockney, and Doug said the word is joyful. It's just joyful. And ultimately, I think artists have a job. What I've said about them is they're always chroniclers of our time. It's their job to force us to deal with issues in society. But ultimately, and Lichtenstein always talked about his famous professor, Hoyt Sherman at Ohio State University. And what he said about Professor Sherman was, he taught me how to see. And if we think about all artists, first they have to do something to get us to stop and look at the work. If you don't stop and look at it, it doesn't matter what they're doing. And second, it's really about learning how to see. Now, in the case of Kara Walker and those folks, they're forcing us to deal with our values and society, and are we living the lives we think we're living, and how do we in society deal with issues that have been there and will continue to be there. At the same time, you look at David Hockney's work, and it's so uplifting and joyful, and he helps us learn how to see. You look at his work, he just seduces us. He just draws us in. And that's why I think, as Kimberly said, it's almost like the latest work is the best work, because he's had 86 years to continue to hone and fine-tune and get better and better and better. And the wonderful thing about him is that he's still working and getting up and making a difference every day. And they know better than I about him, but that's his job. He, I think, I just don't see him suddenly saying, okay, I'm done painting. Ain't gonna happen. Some people say they're going to die at the office. He's going to die in front of the iPad. Just sheer joy.
We can take maybe two more questions. So, Deb, I think in the back.
I'll stand up. I am a printmaker by degree, and I love that you start to collect prints and spread them so all of us can enjoy them. So thank you. But my question is related to Hockney. He's worked, he's done etchings, he's done beautiful lithographs. But it looks like, maybe just because it's the most recent, the iPad just really, really grabbed him. And I'd like to know if etching or lithography grabbed him the same way when he was working with those media.
I think that one of the things that changed for him in working with technology in different ways, that when he was making etchings early on and lithographs, having people assist him in doing all of that, he's worked with really only a small number of printers and publishers, up through only last group of work was done with Morris Payne through Paste Prints in the end of the 90s. And from that point on, he has actually been, and even before that, 1986, he started publishing his own work. And I think that the ease that he has with the digital technology, it took a long time for him originally drawing on the computer. Computer just really couldn't keep up with what he wanted to make and the images that he wanted to develop. As the iPad got faster and faster, it could really keep up with what he wanted to be able to draw, but it was because of the printmaking techniques that he understood so well and how to build up an image and how one thing sat on top of something else that allowed him to use the iPad with such clarity and with such an ability. He makes it look like it should be so easy, but you'll see in there they've got some of the animations of how the images are developed, and it's extraordinary what he's done with it. But he didn't give up working with etching or lithography, but he just became consumed with being able to control every aspect of it himself, which he really enjoyed.
I'm going to add to that, actually, because she's a printmaker. So there is a wall of prints, sort of highlighting what Kimberly said, in funny frames that are done on a color copy machine. And you saw them in oval frames and rectangle frames, and they're very simple images. Those are the prints that Kimberly referred to as him when he began to publish his own work. So this is I think the last etching he made was 98, when Morris came up into the garage and made those plates. So in 86, a Canon color copier was delivered to the studio, one of the first ones, like first 4 out of the box. David got one, brought to the studio, and he thought it was awesome because it printed green, it printed red, it printed black, and...
He loved the blacks.
But was it just the 3 colors? No, there was a blue as well, right? So it was 4 colors, including black. So what he had, or how he surmised it being David's brain, was there's a camera that takes a picture of the glass, and there's a printer that prints out the image. So it's a printer. It's a printing machine. Takes its own picture and spits it out. So he just thought that was cool, right? So those he refers to as the homemade prints, and he's done them all himself, every one of them, putting socks, painting on the glass, cutting fabrics and putting patterns on there.
The shirt on the self-portrait is his shirt.
His shirt scrumpled up, the dog, whatever. And he runs the paper through and then does a black layer and then does a green layer and then he adds something else and copies that. So they are multiple pass through the computer or pass through the printer to generate these images that are really, when you really think about it, are super magic. I mean, they're spectacular. I don't know if you're familiar with Picasso's lino cuts that he did late in life on his own kitchen floor, cutting the linoleum and making those giant prints. These are Picasso's lino cuts done on a printing machine in the studio of a color copier. So as a result, it's not that he didn't like etching anymore or photography anymore. There's an image here where he's in the Gemini studio drawing on a stone, a portrait of Gregory on a stone. It's a good picture, let's face it. But that effort, going somewhere else, not being in the studio, having assistants, I think after 20 years of having done that, he just grew tired of it, and he wanted to just do it all on his own. He wanted it to be easy and simple. And then when the iPad comes along, I don't know that he necessarily sees them as print making. I mean, he sees them as paintings on glass that are, the only way to see it is to print it out. And in this case, make an edition so he can pay the staff, essentially. And it's true. So they're really paintings that are rendered on a glass that are painted. So it's really, he's gone beyond printmaking at this point, really. I mean, but the mechanic of printmaking.
He calls the most recent works iPad paintings. And he's made photo drawings and iPad drawings, and they're produced as editions, but in his mind, they are photographs, they are paintings, they are drawings. He hasn't made any distinction with any of that. Yeah.
One more question, maybe? Yes.
I'm interested in the art of collecting. So you advice you give to people in the art of collecting? And from a gallerist's point of view, how do we get people to come into galleries that when they look in the window are scared to death to walk through the door?
Ooh. Well, first of all, you have to put on great shows. You have to give people something that engages with them, and you have to be friendly and willing to talk to them about anything that's there. It's hard enough to get anyone to walk through the door. Our gallery is in Venice, California. We get all kinds of people who walk through the door, but you can never know. I mean, someone in a bathing suit could come in and spend $100,000 on something, and that's just where they were that day. So you have to be nice to everyone. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to have a point of view and develop, a group of things that you believe in. And
I mean, maybe can I just say about LA Louver, Kimberly's gallery, it is an extraordinary gallery in that they have artists that they work with for decades and support them through so many phases. So it's really an extraordinary thing that you do, and the artist benefits and the audience benefit.
what,
I was going to tease you a little bit because, yes, from a collector's point of view, I had a really great friend who would come to the gallery, was a collector. And he, back in my salad days when I was a decade out of college, and I asked him, what brought you into collecting? He also collected parallel to you, early, pop art prints. Warhol, go crazy. And he's like, oh, I remember I was in college in Chicago. No, he went to Notre Dame. College in Notre Dame, and we went to this gallery, and they gave us wine and food. And I bought the Renoir print, and I've been a crazy guy ever since. So that got him into the gallery. So.
Yeah. What would you say, Jordan?
Well, two things. First, I'll say to people in terms of how they start. Well, 2 points. First, I've been asked to talk at some wealth conferences, and what I'll say to those folks is, when you're lucky enough to have created a little bit of assets and you work with these wonderful financial analysts to help you work on your estate planning and set up trusts and not trusts, what I've said is, in my opinion, the greatest gift you can give your children is a passion for the arts. Because in the end, all of us know that we've all gone through a lot more than we ever imagined when we were younger, and our children, nieces, nephews, neighbor kids, whatever, they'll go through their challenges too. But if they have a passion for the arts, obviously I love visual arts, we also support dance, music, opera, all the others too, then maybe when they have those health issues, the relationship issues, the job issues, the kid issues, all the things that hit us all, that they go to a gallery, go to a museum, see some art on the street. They can maybe for those few moments be a bit taken away from their issues and go back a bit refreshed and have more clarity about how to solve their issue. So I try to stress that often. I also say to parents, grandparents, whatever, instead of just buying the Lego kids, the Barbie dolls, the Hasbro stuff, whatever, just get your kids, first when you have them, especially if your parents or grandkids, take them to a museum. Just spend 15 minutes before you go off and do the other kid things. Okay, just let them see that those buildings where there's neat stuff is for everyone, not just for some elitist few. And start that early. And also in terms of presents, get them something, whether it's $5 you buy at a Saturday market or whether it's $50 or $500, whatever. And I guarantee you, years from now, they won't know where the Barbie dolls were, the Hasbro, the Star Wars or whatever, but they'll have that little piece of art. Next, in terms of collecting, what I'll say to people is, it's really pretty easy. Galleries are wonderful places. They're free. You walk in. You can ask any question. Why do you have this artist? Why do you pick them? What's going on? Whatever. Just go. And I guarantee you, if you go to some galleries, go to some museums, eventually something will speak to you. And you'll have a sense that that's something maybe I want to live with and wake up to every day. What I think is sad is we've all known some people that fortunately have made some money. And suddenly they'll think, oh, I need some art. So they'll go to an art advisor. I have nothing against art advisors, but in the end, the worst thing is to have someone else tell you what you should have. That defeats the whole purpose of it. And I think also what I've always done is, again, I want my real estate to go up in value. The art, I hate it when it goes up because that just means getting more of certain things is that much more expensive. I've never sold anything, never will. Some people buy art for investment purposes, and that's fine. But what I would suggest is buy something that you like, that again speaks to you. And if it goes up in value, fine. But in the meantime, be happy with what it is. So, and prints are a wonderful way to get into the art world. I love all the art mediums. We have 5,000 paintings and sculptures, and buy lots of that. But prints are wonderful because they're generally more affordable, and it's a good way to take that first step towards building a collection.
I think that's a great note to end on, and I just want to thank you all for being here in the audience tonight, and thank Doug and Kimberly, and thank Jordan so very much for sharing his incredible collection with us.
Let me just make one impassioned plea. And again, I go to lots of museums, and all of you should be so proud of what your team here at the Honolulu Museum of Art has done. The work is extraordinary. But just because the work is extraordinary, there's also a gift of how you curate it, where you put what, the colors of the walls, and Doug was talking about how they place things, was truly spectacular. Really, so congratulations to all of you.
Yes.
And lastly, for all of you, I've said so often, I said to a few of you I talked to, I've said too many eyes don't wear out the art. As long as this team has done such a fabulous job, the only shame is when the show closes in March, okay, that every single person in this whole community doesn't visit it. So think about your neighbors, your friends, your nieces, nephews, seniors, whoever it is. Pick them up, get them here, so they can experience the magic of this incredible artist. Thank you.
Thank you.